to good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this learning experience. My name is Cody, and I'd love to welcome you back to Techstrong Learning, where we have an exciting roundtable ahead. Before we get this conversation rolling, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First of all, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch later time, or of course, you can share with your team. We will be sending you a link via email that will give you access to the on-demand recording of our session today. Now, if you'd like to engage with us, there are a few options for you to do so. That first option is the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So if you see that chat tab, I'd like you to go ahead and click it and let us know from where in the world you are joining us. If you have any specific questions you'd like us to weave into our conversation today, please send those questions into our Q&A tab. Sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep track of them, and we want to be sure to bring in as many of your questions as we can today. So be sure to send those in as soon as you have them. If you check the handout section, you'll see there are a few resources that have been uploaded for you, so feel free to grab those. And of course, before we close things out today, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around to make sure you're one of our lucky winners. So today, our conversation revolves around operationalizing DevSecOps. And I'm joined today by Om Vias, CEO and co-founder at Oak9, Josh Thorngren, VP of Marketing at Mayhem by For All Secure, John Morton, Field CTO at Britiv, and we have Shari Arad Ifsan, Senior Director of Product Management at Min.io. Now, leading our conversation today is, of course, our very own Sharon Florentine, Managing Editor at Techstrong Group. Sharon, would you like to go ahead and get this conversation rolling?
I would love to, Cody. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for being here with me today, continuing this conversation about DevSecOps. I am going to reiterate what Cody said to the audience. Please don't be shy. Send in your questions, comments, anything into that Q&A tab. We will weave them right into the conversation today. We love to hear from you, so keep them coming. But yeah, first of all, I would like to start out by asking why it's taking so long to operationalize DevSecOps. I mean, we've had DevOps for a decade or so. We've gotten better about weaving security into the process, making sure that that's something we're focused on, but actually operationalizing this as a common practice seems to be taking longer. Why do you think that is? Nope, nobody wants to start.
Well, I mean, I can kick things off.
Go for it.
You know, I remember before I joined the dark side and became a marketer, I was a DevOps practitioner, and this was the early days, and it was easy. And I say easy with rose-colored glasses, but the challenges we were facing on the DevOps side were how do we start to do operational tasks earlier on in the process. And I think over the past decade plus, DevOps as a whole has matured in a way that those operational tasks are now doable in developer-friendly ways. I think for DevSecOps, one of the challenges that we face with operationalizing it is we're still in the stages of taking a security task, taking a security tool, and moving it left and saying to developers, do the security the way it was done before, just do it earlier. And I think we're only now starting to see the emergence of truly dev-focused security practices, tooling, and methodologies that help that shift left become reality and become operationalized.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you know, one of the challenges also, right, if you think about, you mentioned, Sharon, that it's, you know, we're 10 years into this journey, but part of DevSecOps or DevOps is really a cultural transformation, right? And inherently, cultural transformations are hard because, you know, you have enterprises and organizations that are ranging from 1 to 5 development teams to hundreds of development teams under a single organization. They each have their own technology stack. They each have their own set of requirements that they're operating from. On top of that, they're inherently, you're talking about developers, so security folks, right? And then you have your DevOps or SREs or cloud ops engineers, right? So there is a lot of different constituencies, if you will, that are trying to work together, right? And anytime you're talking about how do we, as Josh pointed out, operationalize, right? So there are the operational challenges, there are the cultural challenges, and then there are the prioritization challenges, right? So it really they're all sort of fighting to get time. They're fighting together to say, well, how do we actually make this happen? And to me, a key aspect of this that, often gets overlooked is as practitioners, right? As Josh mentioned, right? In my past life, I used to be a practitioner as well. And I think we often forget that we need support from leadership as well, right? Because it really needs to be a common goal that starts with, hey, here's what we want to define as our common goal. We are trying to do X, Y, Z as an organization as it relates to DevSecOps versus just saying that this is oftentimes leaders provide guidelines and priority with respect to, I need to deliver this capability to our customers. But we forget, what does that priority look like for DevSecOps, right? So I thought, to me, that's a key inherent challenge where I just think that we are not quite where we want to be, partially because of all of the aspects that I mentioned, but really starting from leadership coming in and defining this as a priority, because ultimately DevSecOps and the efficient operations around it actually creates agility to deliver those capabilities that ultimately every business wants to deliver to their customers as a differentiator.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like we discussed, the tools and the mindset, and then we discussed like the more cultural shift, which is also a very big challenge for, I guess, all of us. But I also want to touch upon we discussed a little bit about like the shift left approach, right? So, using, and all of us are familiar with that, but I think that really like enabling the shift left approach is moving the vulnerability detection, the vulnerability remediation to the developers, while also taking into account the right side, which is, what's happening in runtime. How do we know to actually assess the risk, right? You mentioned prioritization. So I think these are things that, we've been discussing them for a while, but I think that the tools and the automations and the way to actually, merge the left side with the right side is something that we're seeing actually just recently. And just recently we're seeing like the industry figuring this out. So I think this is also a very big thing with like, DevOps has been here or DevSecOps have been here for over 10 years, but just now we have the right tooling, the right knowledge to actually make sense of it.
I think it's important to acknowledge vertical too. I hate to be that person, but I think DevSecOps does exist in newer cloud-based organizations that really focus on health tech and fintech. If you're talking about traditional finance, insurance, things like that, you're absolutely right, Josh and Sheree, that trying to align KPIs of a CISO who's governed by risk versus that of a development team that gets paid to push product, or in the Fed and SLED space where they don't even have anywhere near the same metrics, you're not going to see the same sort of adoption or push, no matter how good the tools are. Even if they are free, which they always beg for, open source, to us, you still don't see the adoption because of really that thing. But there are some areas, I just want to highlight that. Health tech and fintech recently, especially who adopt cloud early on, my absolute favorite. We build software at Brightive, and I love those folks because it's natural conversation, but just wanted to point that out.
That's a great point, and it's a good segue into another question that I wanted to ask about regulation around security and software supply chain security. The cyber strategy here in the US, Sbombs, and then the CRA, Cyber Resilience Act in the EU that was a huge topic of conversation a couple weeks ago. How does that impact it? And, John, to your point, do you see regulations and legislation like that moving the rest of the industry toward where those verticals are now?
That's a big can of worms there, Sharon.
It is. That's
I'm gonna crack it open.
Just crack those open and let you guys go.
Yeah, because one thing I like to think about is regulation evolves from pain, in my opinion. Regulation at a federal level, whether that's, whatever country or state. That means someone is complaining to those regulators, lawmakers, that decision arm enough where they demand change. Now, unfortunately, those same folks don't know what change means. They can write a whole list of rules and regulations that they generally have no answer to and say we've done enough. So that does really hurt. And again, I like to break it down to vertical, where it's sometimes easier to skimp those regulations or pay that fine of risk versus having to confront it by implementing some new process, some new tool, some new technology. So regulation derives from pain, the net of it. And most of those regulators don't know what we're talking about when they get that problem. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting the focus that we've seen here in the U.S. on the Sbomb, because John, to your point about the pain that focus on Sbomb is solving is I've been breached, or there's a new 0 day. How do I, as a CISO, how do I, as someone with responsibility for risk, assess my entire attack surface? Where is this vulnerability? Where do I go tackle it? But from a how do we accelerate security in the development of net new applications, Sbomb doesn't necessarily solve that, because it doesn't tell you what's on the attack surface. It's the catalog. And we've had a lot of different ways to catalog things before in security. This isn't a sea change for that, but it is a accelerator of response. And so, I think about, John, your point about what's the pain driving it. Like, this is going to solve how do we respond faster to 0 days? How do we, capital E enterprises reassure our customers that, hey, we looked everywhere and we're not vulnerable. I think a lot of the regulations are addressing that versus doing anything that moves the needle on what we would consider DevSecOps.
Yeah, Josh, I think you're spot on, right? I mean, even if you look at, the latest, state of DevOps reports, for example, one of the things that, they talk about is that even organizations that are more on the maturity and automation curve, right, in their DevSecOps practices, they still takes them a day to a week to respond to a known vulnerability. So absolutely, right? I mean, I think, Sbombs help you with, having an inventory and understanding of where to go look and then react to it. So it's very reactionary, right? And I think, one of the things that if you look at, really fundamentally, our belief at Oak 9 and my belief is that, and Shiri, I think you touched on this a little bit, right? Like we're as a world that's moving into the cloud native space, we're starting to learn that it's not just about shifting left, right? It's really, if anything, it's about starting left and shifting right. Because, shifting left, again, goes back to the reactive nature of things, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm in the cloud. I found a bunch of things. I have hundreds of and thousands of alerts and noise, but really, where do I find the signal? And to me, Josh, I don't know if this is where you were going, right? But it really needs to be more really focused around design. It needs to be focused around how do we actually build secure by design. So really think about at the design phase, at the code phase. If we're talking about with respect to DevSecOps, then it needs to really be addressed at the point of time when the changes are made versus saying that, hey, I have an Sbomb report that my enterprise has created. Well, that's too late, right? But certainly we know that from a government and regulatory standpoint, Sharon, that you're calling out, right? It's really, this is what I see as an effort by you, whether it's U.S. government, whether it's EU, whether it's Japan, that's really creating also a lot of awareness. It's really, they are really saying, hey, we are in the awareness phase of this, right? We want to get the mass enterprises aware that at least this is the bare minimum you need to do, right? But Josh, I don't know if where you were going, at least in my opinion, we need to be way further along, but we need to start.
Security is a product feature. Like, it's a product feature. You scope it, you build it, you have a roadmap to iteratively improve security in your applications. That's the world. That's where we need to go. Yeah, totally agree.
But I agree. I think it's exactly that. I mean, for us at Mend, we see organizations struggling with this issue of, security or Sbombs, and in various maturity levels. So I think, Sbomb does provide transparency, but we need to remember that this is like a snapshot of software components at a specific point in time. And there is a lot that we need to do in order to act. We're talking about how to operationalize this. So Sbomb is, I think, very, very like the basic, and does not give you the option to actually make it more operational. I think we're like a lot after that, maybe 5-6 years ago, when we discussed with customers, it was about, give me a report of all of my vulnerabilities and that's it, right?
Yeah.
That was the word, like, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. We're not in that world anymore. And Sbombs are sort of like, okay, we're in that loop again. And I think that today organizations, or more mature organization, actually understand that it's about reducing the risk. It's about handling the risk. It's just about showing the risk at a point in time. That doesn't really help. So yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things that I know as part of the cybersecurity strategy, right? One of the things that you see in there is that, government is holding and accountable software service providers and software and service providers, right? To say that, hey, there is a baseline of security that you must achieve in order for government to procure your software or your service that you're providing, right? And to me, that goes back to, Shiri, what you're saying, which is, hey, having an Sbomb is not going to be that baseline. In order to achieve and government to procure your service or software, right, then you have to do more and say, hey, I need to show that my processes are better. I have automated, whether it's tools, it's really three components, right? People, technology, and processes, right? Across the board, a software vendor needs to do more to say, we are following secure software practices. We're using tools and automation to be secure by design. Again, it goes back to start left, shift right versus trying to shift left. So that's another thought, right, from a government and regulation standpoint.
So someone in the audience had a good question. I'm going to bring it in here. It asks if we can use the existing security resources that exist. I'm sorry, I think I'm reading that wrong. Let me go back and rephrase. Do we find that we can utilize the existing type of security resources that exist today in our journey to drive continuous security? Or does how we staff need to also be considered as part of this evolution? So I think what they're asking is, how does the talent recruiting, hiring, staffing element play into this? What do we need to be looking for that might be the same or different based on this approach? Hope I got that right.
It's a big question, because part of what we talk about with DevSecOps is, how do you make those cultural shifts that enable everyone in the process to own security? And it's also, how do we take traditional security jobs and give them to development teams? I think in any shift like this, there's always going to be a reconsideration of what are the skills necessary, and especially at the rate technology and security is advancing, that's ongoing. More urgently, I think, though, is something that, and John, you brought up this point when you were talking about the verticals, in fintech, in newer health tech, some of those companies are born cloud native, born cloud just running, and they have DevSecOps. But part of that is the KPIs and the goals for development teams include a measure of reliability, include a measure of security that doesn't exist in a traditional enterprise where risk is owned purely by the CISO and team there. And so I think more than like what types of people, it's how do we make sure that everyone in the DevSecOps lifecycle has security as a KPI or a goal?
Yeah, Josh, that's what I was going to say. Most oftentimes, I don't see ever. I can count on one hand the number of organizations where the CISO's KPIs align with the goals of the business are literally to reduce risk, act as a figurehead who's going to get fired in 18 to 24 months, hopefully gets a golden parachute and moves on. That doesn't align well with giving our developers, our operations, I like to call them builders, guardrails, right? The guardrails they need to be successful. So I like that point there, Josh.
Yeah, and I think also like how do you create those guardrails, right? It's guardrails over gates, right? So that I also think that one of the key challenges, I think we can all kind of nod our head and agree that like, look, guardrails are important, KPIs and metrics and alignment is important, but the hard part is how do you actually do it, right? And I think the trends that at least I'm seeing with a lot of our customers that are doing it well versus the ones that are kind of struggling or they are kind of stuck in the middle of their journey is really around around automation, right? So I don't know any organization across any of our customers that say, oh, I have enough security engineers or practitioners on my teams, right? I just don't, I haven't met one organization that could say that. Secondly, so there's resource constraints, right? Sharon, to your earlier question or the participant's question, right? And so we're never going to fulfill all the security jobs that are out there, right? Secondly, I think developers are, special people, I myself being one of them. So it's really about, autonomy, freedom, but collaboration. And I love the points that Josh and John made, which is, guardrails are important, but I think like automation is key, right? So I think we live in an, everything is code world. And I think security to some degree, to an extent, needs to be delivered in an automated way, right? Because if security engineers operationally are used to reviewing architectural diagrams that are in Word or Visio or name your tool here, well, nobody knows whether that architecture diagram actually made it, and that's exactly what your cloud footprint looks like today. So it needs to be that part of that autonomy, part of that guardrail has to be that security has to be delivered in an innovative way. And as code, like security as code, is a way, for example, for security to say we will define that those guardrails as code that then can be operationalized across the pipeline, across the world where developers and engineers live, without necessarily blocking their progress or velocity, right? So that's another area that I'm seeing a lot of movement from our customers that are positively realizing a lot of benefits of automation and successful DevSecOps programs.
Yes, I really like that you brought the word autonomy because it's definitely one of my strongest beliefs. Like I believe that security should be decentralized and there may be one team that sets the policy, but at the end of the day, developers have to do it. So we need to give them the tools and the autonomy and give them the right KPIs so that they can basically control it and assign, a security champion for each and every development team. So I definitely agree that it's all about a shift in the mindset and in the culture. And it's about breaking down the silos between, development, security, and operation teams. And that only happens when you have a very good autonomy and the right KPIs.
Yeah.
I think that plays into that question they had there, Sharon. Is it all right if I
Go for
jump
it.
on participant 166 there?
Absolutely. Love to see it.
So they asked, what advice do you have for young and aspiring DevOps and DevSecOps engineers? Let me give you a real world example here of what we look for when we hire. Build fast, build smart, curious and coachable. What does that mean? In my own organization, I'm considered the PowerShell guru, believe it or not. That ages me. You know what I do when I encounter a PowerShell problem? I go on Stack Overflow and I download a sample of code and I execute it. Nothing wrong with that, right? But what I'm failing to do is consider the greater ramifications or the security aspects of it. So to Josh, Sheree, everyone's point, right? I'm going to do what I need to do to make something function. I just want it to work. But what I need to do is think about how this impacts the rest of the organization. Is it a piece of code? Do I understand how it works? Do I understand the repos behind it? Can I build it into an automation process with like GitHub, for example, as part of my build process and CI/CD? So thinking outside of just, I may be smart enough to make this thing function. How do I incorporate the rest of this into what I'm doing? Really demonstrates, that curious and coachable efficiency of breaking into DevOps or even specifically DevSecOps, of balancing those ideas. I don't know if anybody else has any feedback on that, but those are the things I look for.
Love the example. I think one of the biggest things that I see, both when working with internal SRE teams or DevSecOps teams, or talking to our customers, is when I'm talking to someone in a DevSecOps role or who's been given that as a mandate, bring the organizations together. What they're doing, they're not focused on how do I do the thing the fastest way. They're focused on how do I unlock the maximum amount of balance between speed, security, reliability across all of these teams. And that's a much more complex equation to have to solve. And the challenge that I think I always see the really good SREs I've worked with or sold to succeed at is breaking down, here are the 20 steps for us to get to a better place, into what they're going to do for each team each week, and communicate that out and keep everyone focused on how the technology empowers the people to align on a process. And I think like they're able to do that translation layer between. So going back to the original question, I think for DevOps and DevSecOps engineers breaking into the industry, part of it is also making sure that the technical work you do, you can speak to at a business level, because a lot of what you're going to have to do is align folks across different organizations as well. And if you can do that effectively, you're going to go further than if you're a wizard at all things technical, but can't translate it into other people's business requirements and preferences.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think that it's all about change and change management, right? So we're seeing this world evolving so fast, and it's not only about communicating. I think it's like the most important thing, right? Be very, very, very technical and be able to communicate what you do, but also you have to deal with change and you have to learn constantly. So I think that learning and change management is also very important.
Yeah, totally agree.
I'm going to back up a little bit, because there was a question that came in shortly after we started. I kind of been noodling on it a little bit. And it says, security needs to be in a position to find out where we sit in developing relationships with our engineering partners and incorporating ourselves into the DevOps space. So I think usually when I think about DevSecOps, it's like where the developers approach security and kind of go, how do I do this? How do I incorporate this into my workflow? Rather than security then reciprocating or coming back and saying, how can I help you make your processes more secure? So it seems like, and this may just be a random comment and then we all move on, that there has to be an effort from both sides to bridge the gap, where it's not just developers asking for security's help or security asking developers to, show them Where is it insecure? Where is the pain? Where does it hurt? Can we talk a little more about how that bridges the divide, the collaboration piece there?
Shiri said something. You said something earlier. You were talking about the evolution of what we had in Hey. 7 years ago, we didn't even have the complete list of vulnerabilities. And I think about that in response to this question, because what has really happened is a decade ago, developers said, I want to innovate. And security said, okay, fill out this questionnaire. Do these 20 things. And developers said, I'm not doing that, and went around security. And then we saw this rise of, okay, you're a security tool, but you plug into the CI/CD pipeline. And so security said, developers, just put our tools in your pipeline and run it, and we'll set some controls. But those were gates. Those weren't guardrails, as Om was mentioning. And we created a lot of friction, because then with those gates, there started to be misalignment on priorities and delivery. And I think, security coming to dev or dev going to security, at the end of the day, these are different stakeholders for the same objective. And, going back to the point you were making around secure by design, when product is coming up with what are we releasing next, security's in that room. Security's in that room saying, here are the implications to our attack surface. Here are the new considerations we have to think about, and here's how we need to instrument those. And that may not alter any processes, tools, or anything, but it's the visibility so that we can set the right guardrails moving forward. And I think this is more of the evolution that we're getting to, the right and the left coming together versus the take the scan, put in CI/CD, put a gate, keep everyone on separate sides of that, and a lot of argument. That, to be honest, when I hear questions around who approaches who, to me, that puts me in mind of the world where we put something in the middle and put a gate there and said, great, here we go. And I think we really have to move past that and get away from the who approaches who. We're hand in hand to get them.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, spot on, right? I mean, I think, it's interesting, right? You said like, oh, well, communication between security and development organizations can't be the CI/CD pipeline step that blocks the pipeline from moving forward, right? That gate that we talked about. And, I think, I agree with you, right? I think a key part of this has to be that many security organizations don't just have visibility into the changes that are happening, right? So, fundamental question as an example would be, okay, are your engineering teams, how many changes are they deploying or into production, right? If you look at, for example, highly mature, right, like folks like Etsy and others, they're making, 230 changes in production a day, right? And this is as of my data in 2022. Then you have organizations like ourselves, like we are making, our development engineering teams are making tens of changes to production a day. But the only way you could do that is if the security engineering has visibility, because if that visibility can't come through a CI/CD pipeline failing with 5 critical vulnerabilities or what have you through some scan that some tool did. So agreed with you there, right? And then But I think it's also works both ways, right? Giving them visibility by bringing them to the table is one thing, but then also a key enabler for engineering groups like developers is developers and security engineering have to speak the same language, right? Oftentimes, as a developer, I have no idea how to go about fixing the thing that security has pointed out, because it's not just about like hand off something, right? Whether it's a scan from a tool or what have you, to say, yeah, you need to fix these 5 critical things, but what do they mean? How do I actually fix it? Right? That oftentimes I feel like gets lost, because that I feel like is half the battle. Speak the same language. So it's not about, well, thou shalt have encrypted channels. Well, developer may not know what that means in their architecture and their applications. They need to be spelled out into, well, you need to make sure that your load balancer has mutual TLS. Well, okay, that's great, but how does a developer implement that? So again, and that's not just the tool, right? It's the common language.
That's an interesting problem. See, it's always easier to start something, right? Whenever you're buying, what clouds are we going to go with? What data platform? We can do that as part of procurement. We can include, is it secure? Can we do what we're trying to do securely? It's inheriting these problems where there should be some process or evolution. I don't like relying on tech. I don't want tech to scan because it's still retroactive. Do we have subject matter experts who understand these platforms, can help us build using the tech we have currently, and if we need to extend past that? But inheriting a problem is a lot harder because decisions were made maybe outside of your control, outside of your authority. To your point, Home, what is a developer going to do to improve a WAF? They have nothing. And even an SRE can say, we use this WAF. I'm an expert in it, but why should I do such a thing? So there has to be some sort of process. I like it, the vision from the beginning of, if you work cohesively and understand what we're trying to do as a business and what is acceptable risk, everyone has that mindset. What's acceptable risk? We can steer security towards the right path. Should we put a little more security in this? Should we just use open source? That's what I've seen be successful. But again, it doesn't apply everywhere. Fed, state, local, higher ed, that is not going to work. But in very small or young, agile organizations or business units, to your point, Josh, where they beat security and they just went straight to cloud themselves, you can do these sort of things.
Right. And I like how you mentioned the common language, because it goes both ways, right? It's also about, the developers understand what security teams are saying and speak the same language, but it's also about, like, what I see is that oftentimes security just bombard developers with like hundreds of vulnerabilities and then it's like, okay, I understand that I need to handle them, but what do I do? What is the prioritization? Or maybe when a developer just walks in and sees the vulnerabilities, he's like, okay, I'm not using that. That one is not actually reachable. I'm not using even that specific function that, is vulnerable. So there are a lot of things that we usually see developers actually highlighting to security. And then that, again, becomes sort of, just a lost battle. So I think that also in terms of like making sure that security teams allow the right prioritization and just being business partners and not just, colleagues.
Well, And I think, going back to a point we were talking about earlier, which is it's not enough to just have a report. It's about what are we doing to actively reduce risk. And I think, you're talking about, hey, developers have the contextual awareness of what is actually running and being used in the applications they build. Security has the list of, here's what we know about the vulnerabilities that may or may not actually apply. To reduce risk, you have to bring that knowledge together with the goal of how do we reduce the most risks possible? And I think what's not necessarily happening today is both those teams saying, okay, the goal is reducing risk. How do we combine our information to give us a good starting point? Because going back to operationalizing, you can't operationalize a list of 500 CVEs if you don't have a process for how do we validate what's real and what's not. And technology can help, but both teams have to understand that they're fighting the same battle together.
Yeah, and on that point, right? I think Shiri, both you and Josh said, right, something about that really clicked in my head, which is contextual feedback, right? So we often in today, there's everyone talks about sort of dashboard fatigue, right? But there's general fatigue of just the number of alerts that are coming to developers right now. Those alerts, maybe hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities or CVEs or what have you. So I think part of where the tools, can help is having business context of the application that the developers are building, because you're both right. It's ultimately about managing risk, right? We're accepting risk because are we going to be able to fix everything? Probably not, right? It's not realistic. And I think, John, you were mentioning this earlier too, right? Which is, to it comes down to ultimately burn down. That's something at Oak 9 we talk a lot about, which is, hey, are we burning down, right? Because developers, if you're thinking about from a project management standpoint, like agile approach, but then we can treat security in operationalizing DevSecOps in the same way, right? Are we burning down our vulnerabilities from sprint over sprint to month over month to quarter over quarter, right? And a huge part of that is understanding business context to better address and accept risk, right? Because if I'm building an application that's running in my cloud that's just serving static assets, maybe it doesn't need to have the same security rigor as my core business application, where I have customers' private data.
You just gave me a beautiful dream, Om, by the way.
Versus
talking about security and risk, imagine if a security team brought to the CTO or CIO the ability to avoid a regression or to avoid, a rebuild. Wouldn't that be a beautiful? Normally, it seems like it's more one way. Security's coming at you all the time. Imagine if they did that and they said, hey, you can avoid this regression. You can avoid this extra work if we did this one thing, right? It's that communicating contextually in the same language. I like that a lot. Thanks, huh?
Well,
absolutely.
And also what this does is, you think about security. When are security professionals in the news? Like 9 out of 10 times it's, the team's working hard because company X got breached. Like, that's not, like, it's a terrible world, because if you're playing defense, you have to account for hundreds of thousands of different points. An attacker has to get one thing right. And that can always happen. We can't fix everything. But if we're able to contextualize security as, what are we burning down? How are we showing the number of vulnerabilities going down month over month? That's something where you can celebrate and you can laud the work security teams do in a much more public-facing manner than I think we do today. And I think, going back to the people question, one of the challenges we face, shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And let's be honest, every cybersecurity leader I talk to, they struggle to hire and they struggle with burnout, because you only get recognition when something bad happens. And so how do we set the right goals to let teams demonstrate positive progress day over day, week over week? Is really important. No, I love that point.
Yeah. And it has to be shared as well, right? Because I think, Josh, I think you might have said this earlier, right? Which is, it can't just be a security practitioner's responsibility to deal with all things security, right? If developers or engineering teams as a whole are managing the entire life cycle, then it becomes everybody that's involved in that life cycle's responsibility as a shared responsibility, right? But yeah, you're right. I mean, whoever wears the security or has the security as a prefix in their title is typically the ones that today are held responsible for. And I think that fundamentally, right, as another cultural aspect, right, needs to change in the DevSecOps world, right? And I think it's starting to actually change, right? And I see more and more engineers thinking about, well, how can we apply this so that I can make my life easier, but I can also help take over or take on some of the burden, if you will, that should be shared.
So I think this beats our webinar record. We have made it 43 minutes in, and we have not mentioned AI yet. I'm about to shatter that. So I apologize.
I think you just did.
I did. Sorry. Is AI and automation going to solve some of these burnout, retention, turnover, churn issues? Is this going to help us make DevSecOps a bigger part of, developers and security people's lives? What impact is it going to have? It's already having, I guess.
I mean, it's
yeah.
it's hard, and I think especially in cybersecurity, where AI and ML have kind of been dirty words for a really long time. A vendor comes to you and says, "Oh, well, our AI is really great." What does it actually do? Tell me the benefit to me. I don't care how smart your technology is. I care, does it work in my process in a way that people will get benefit from it without having to make changes. Like you want the balance of easy and good. And I think AI in particular can help a lot of day-to-day work get done faster by everyone involved. But it's not a panacea. We're still going to have the same problems we had before, the rise of ChatGPT, the rise of generative AI. I think one of the biggest potential benefits is not necessarily what we're seeing in the past 6 months with the focus on ChatGPT and large language models, but can AI and ML techniques be used to sort through and process signals that otherwise would require a human or sort of more linear automation to handle? And that's either, can you use AI and ML to generate the security test you're running? Can you use AI and ML to sort through the noise that developers receive? I think we as an industry, we're still figuring that out, but that's where I see the potential impact coming the most versus sort of how we've talked about it historically, which, to be honest, has been a marketing buzzword. And I think our industry as a whole is going to have to get over the past decade of using those words poorly.
So Sharon, I think to your question and about maybe the record that we broke, I think that we broke this record because we spoke so much about strategy, about mindset, about culture, right? And these are the things that, while automation and AI are like such, very powerful tools, and they can help us with like our day-to-day and enhance the cybersecurity world, they are not a real substitute for like a robust security strategy for like our organization, right? So we will still need, at least in the next 2-3 years, this human expertise and understanding the different aspects of the architecture and having good security practices, because at the end of the day, AI, it's a tool, right? And it helps us when we have a problem that we need to solve, but we need to first articulate this problem and understand it, and then let AI solve it. So I think this is my take of it.
Yeah,
I like that, Sherry.
Yeah. That is
I like that. You could
way.
give me $1 billion today, but money's just a tool. It's not going to solve all my problems. You give me AI today, that doesn't mean it's going to solve all my problems, right? So to your point, exactly. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a great comment in the chat that says anything you automate via AI ML is only as good as the engineer who can monitor and retrain the ML as needed. And I agree, that's a big problem, because right now, how do you know that the model that's trained on is going to produce the results that you need? You don't.
Yeah, and I think it's twofold, right? I think as Josh mentioned, right, like AI ML is in security has been traditionally a dirty word, and you talked, John, earlier about like Stack Overflow, but how many engineers are right now going to ChatGPT and saying, "Hey, create my Terraform for XYZ Lambda that I want to deploy," or give me my pipeline code, right? How do I deploy this pipeline? Give me that code. And again, that model is trained as latest as 2021. So now it doesn't know about what it doesn't know, right? So I look at AI ML as really kind of twofold, right? One, from a complexity of challenges that we're introducing as a result of how quickly generative AI is getting popular and how it's actually being utilized in generating code, right? The second part of this equation is, we talked about, can it actually help us, right? And I think that there are actually benefits, right? Shiri, you mentioned, we need to understand the problem world. We need to understand the architecture, right? We need to understand it's not just about a specific pointed configuration or what have you. To me, I think you hit it on the head, which is, it's really about understanding an emergent property of security of the system, what security is, right? Security is an emergent property of a system. So therefore, I think where AI can really help is really being able to literally connect the dots and understand intent, right? When you marry the patterns with what the user's intent is, then I think security could be really, really, or AI could be really, really impactful and, in helping address security in a positive way, right? Because I think AI and ML can truly help understand and identify patterns. And oftentimes, right, this is not always true, but oftentimes at many enterprises, you have 20% of the patterns that are proliferated, right? Whether those are architectural patterns, container architectures, serverless architectures, whatever you have that are proliferated across 80% of the enterprise, right? So I think that's where AI can help, right? At least some thoughts that I have around, how it can work both ways, right? Benefits, but also the other way.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. So as we're starting to wrap up here, any final thoughts anybody wants to give on this topic, where we need to go to really operationalize DevSecOps going forward? Don't leave me hanging. Josh, save me.
Yeah, I think, let's see, participant like 632 in the chat said, communication is everything or else DevSecOps is worth nothing. And I think that's the headline, because all the things we're talking about, how do you automate with AI and ML, or even automation in general? Where do you put the tools in? Where do you define the guardrails and gates? You can't just start by doing these things. You have to get everyone on the same page and keep everyone there. And I think one of the, and this isn't necessarily DevSecOps, but one of the craziest things for me earlier in my career, when I first moved to becoming a manager of managers, was I'd say the same thing to my 5 direct reports. And then I'd hear from their direct reports what that direction was. And I heard 25 different things. And the constant, okay, how do we make sure we're keeping everyone on the same page and reinforce that and say it enough and repeat it and document it and communicate it? Those are challenges every organization, every team, regardless of discipline, has. One of the challenges we have in security and DevSecOps is we tend to tools first, communication second. And that's how we got gates in the CI/CD. That's how we got AI ML as a dirty word. If we communicate more about what we're doing, why, and how we continue to keep on the same page, we're going to be much more successful operationalizing.
I loved what one of the participants, I think it's participant 655, they have their 3 C's of success, and it's curiosity, communication, and collaboration. And I thought that was pretty good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It's that old saying, it takes a village, right? My favorite thing is it's better together, whether it's business units, whether it's vendors, whether it's technology, whether it's policy, better together. Are we working towards the same objective? You'll see this a lot too, where organizations don't. That's where the breakdown is. There's silos of organizational units. So those 3 C's are perfect. 655.
Well said. There's a question we're not going to be able to get to about AI taking over tech and how justifiable that is. I think we'll save that for another webinar. No, really, we didn't get to your question, we will send it on, and panelists will have an opportunity to respond at will. But for now, I'm going to turn it back over to Cody. He's got some stuff to cover with you here before we end. Cody, there you are.
Yep, I had to go through a couple extra hoops, but John, Cherie, Josh, Sharon, and Om, thank you all so much for joining us today. This was such an awesome conversation. And the fact that we waited until about 43 minutes to discuss AI is always a good thing. We've got a lot of good stuff out of the way first. So again, thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to remind our audience that we've been recording today. So if you'd like to rewatch our discussion, or if you'd like to forward this discussion along to your team, You will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section where it will be waiting for you. Now, the 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card giveaway are Reg H, Ramsey B, Manuel B, and Hari R. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. We'll reach out to you in the next 48 hours to distribute that to you. If you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder on the off case that it happens to get filtered out. And I would like to put a link in the chat real quick. However, if you do just stick around with us, you will be funneled straight into our post-webinar survey. So we would love to hear your thoughts, whether they be about today's program or if you have ideas for upcoming topics, please let us know there as well. Either way, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day. And Josh, John, Cherie, and Sharon, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, you may now disconnect.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.